Why are monarch butterflies so amazing? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about your backyard nature one small step at a time. Now, I live in the North Woods and we have a lot of monarch butterflies, but I've seen them other places too. I've been on the coast of Maine and saw an entire rock garden area that was just filled with monarch butterflies. They like coming up north. They stay and breed in this area. They also go to southern Canada as part of their migration, but we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Monarch butterflies are part of a milkweed butterfly group. There are a few butterflies that like milkweed, like swallowtails and frilleries, and I've seen those too. But none of them will breed or use them as a place to place their eggs. There are some, but they are primarily south of here and in Mexico and in tropical areas, not up here. But they are monarchs, bright orange, wings on the back with black veins and white spots. And it's a warning sign to the predators that if you eat it, it will be toxic. Monarch butterflies, not only, like I said, can breed on milkweed, but they can eat it and they can ingest it and they are safe from it. But it is a toxic, poisonous plant. And so it will cause them to be poisonous to other animals, other birds and things like that. So they get left alone. And there are very few, like I said, that can handle that kind of toxin. They have a symbiotic relationship, which means that they rely on each other for survival. Their wingspan is about 3.5 to 4 inches, and it's one of the larger butterflies in North America, although I've seen some giant swallowtails that are pretty darn big. The monarch caterpillars eat only milkweed plants, and the toxic component, like I said, makes the caterpillars and the adult butterflies poisonous to birds. Adults drink nectar from many flowers, but the dependency on milkweed makes them unique, makes the monarchs very unique. Now, what's interesting is, like most butterflies, they have an egg, which is a little white dot. I didn't realize it until I carefully watched a monarch land on a milkweed during autumn, and it dropped a white dot onto the milkweed, and that's the egg. It's on the underside of it. Then the larva stage is the caterpillar, which is striped yellow and black. It changes color as it goes. But then eventually it turns into a chrysalis, a pupa, and it has a green jewel-like case onto it. That it has gold spots, and that's where the transformation occurs. I saw this really cool study that essentially when they're in the chrysalis, they turn into goo. It's not like the feet become feet and the wings become, where it came from legs or something like that. They completely degenerate into goo and then form into a butterfly. Some scientists did some fantastic experiments. They were talking about the essence of how do we know or how do we study things in a black box? We don't really know what goes on inside the chrysalis, what transformation happens or how it happens, or is it the same brain or a different brain? And so what they did is they did some sort of good old-fashioning conditioning with the caterpillar with a smell, so that when it smelled something, it would have a certain reaction. And then when the butterfly came out, they tested it, and sure enough, the butterfly also has the same reaction. So the memory or some component of the brain is still in there, which is really cool. The adult butterfly emerges with crumpled up wings, and then it expands and they harden into full-blown wings within hours. They're very vulnerable at that point. Most generations just live a few weeks, except there's a super generation that lasts enough to go to Mexico and migrate in the fall, which is about to happen. Again, this idea of this multi-generational migration happens only in the fall, and it happens in populations in Canada and the northern U.S., and they fly south to Mexico every fall. But the return trip is more complicated, and that is completed by several generations of it, meaning that the butterfly that leaves Canada and returns to Mexico when they get back to Canada are the great grandparents of the ones that actually return. No single butterfly makes the entire round trip. So that's pretty amazing, and we'll get into that with much more detail. We don't know exactly how they know which way to go. We believe that it has something to do with the sun's position and maybe even some sort of a magnetic detection field or some sort of, someone thinks, like an inherited mental map of this area. Now, the populations have declined in recent decades, and a lot of that had to do with the loss of milkweed. The areas in Mexico that were deforested, they are listed as endangered, but are not yet federally protected by the U.S. One of the things that we've been doing here, and that's kind of a big thing in my area, is asking people and places to grow milkweed where they can. What happened, I think, what I noticed over the years is we got really serious about mowing everything. Everything had to be lawn, and everything had to get mowed. And the bands between roadways and on the side of roadways, we've got to mow it. That is civilization, right? And what has been happening is that this mowing has been backed off on. Now we're letting natural wildflowers grow in areas where we can, on the edges of woods, around paths, and allowing the milkweed to be established. They grow quite well. I was just up north with my family, and we were in this kind of sandy, beachy area along the Gulf of Green Bay, and there was a little patch of milkweed that was growing, and I noticed that the milkweed was growing into the sand. So it is pretty hardy and can take over areas. My plan next year, I have some milkweed seeds, is to grow them. I have kind of a long backyard. I don't go way into the way back very often. I sort of stick and do things to my house. I started thinking, could I turn the very back of my yard into a small prairie? Wouldn't that be cool? So I think I'm going to grow some flowers and some milkweed and see if I can't help our little butterfly friends grow. Now, in Mexico, when they arrive in Mexico, it coincides with the Day of the Dead. The local tradition is sort of seen as a returning of the souls to their ancestors. So it's kind of a big deal. And these butterflies kind of glide along the current, a little bit like birds, which helps them reduce the amount of energy that they use. But monarchs are not just in North America. There are populations in Australia, New Zealand, Spain, across the Pacific. So that's great. I think it's really kind of a cool thing that, I don't know, like I said, it's just one of my favorite things to watch monarchs. And I get so excited when I see them come back here. Now, the journey south, like I said, the monarchs east of the Rockies will fly to central Mexico and into a forest that is in central Mexico. The monarchs on the west of the Rockies will migrate to coastal California, Santa Cruz, Pacific Grove, and then go. Some travel as much as 3,000 miles to get into that direction. Like I said, on the way back in fall, which is about to happen, one monarch does that. Now, the spring and summer migration, it means that the monarchs only really live 2 to 6 weeks. They're very short-lived. And what they do is that they will plant eggs all the way along the way. So they may stop in a location, plant an egg, and then that generation will fly a little bit more north. And then they will plant eggs, and then that generation will fly a little bit more north. And it's pretty cool how that happens. But eventually they will come into the breeding grounds, which is here in the North Woods and in, like I said, northern Canada. 4 to 5 generations make that trip up north. They know through circadian clocks, their antennas orient themselves. They, like I said, detect the Earth's magnetic field. They feel like on cloudy days, so that if they don't have the sun, they can still navigate. And despite decades of studying this, the scientists don't fully understand how this new generation knows exactly what to do, since not one butterfly makes the trip up north. Now, what happens? Like I said, right now we're starting to see it. We saw the monarchs lay the eggs. they'll start to leave. They'll start to cluster up and then they will go. In Mexico, they cluster up closely in fir trees. And if you can see the picture of it, it's beautiful. It creates this orange blanket around the tree itself. These microclimates in these forests help protect them from freezing, from desiccation. They get roughed up. In California, they gather on eucalyptus, Monterey pines, cypress groves. And so it's a big deal. This migration is just kind of amazing. And some interesting things to know about the migration is that the monarch's wing acts like little tiny solar panels, warming their muscles in flight. The monarchs have been tracked. I know, little tiny trackers. I've seen images and videos of that. 50 to 100 miles in a single day. And the tagging program lets us all understand their migration just a little bit better. Monarchs are one of the few insects that migrate like birds. The late summer migration, or what we would, consider fall, I guess it would be this kind of time of year, they call them something the Methuselah generation, which is a term from the Bible or someone who lived a very long period of time. What happens is that these butterflies actually survive 8 or 9 months. And that's the only reason that they can fly back. No, like I said, butterfly flies both ways, but they do fly back. And what they do is they go through this metamorphosis where they de-emphasize their reproductive system, other systems that they have in their body so that they live longer. It stops the aging process in the monarch butterfly. It's pretty cool that they can do that. And that's what allows them then to fly back in one trip, one monarch. And this process is called reproductive diapause. Like I said, which pauses the reproduction, extends their lifespan to 8 to 9 months. It's considered to be a super generation. And they go all the way from Canada, the North Woods, all the way to Mexico, 3,000 miles. Remember, we said they go like 50 to 100 miles in a day. Spend the winter, and then in the spring, the whole process of their offspring continues the journey northwards. They live the entire way. They can live, at least, there's other things that might stop them, like predators or something. So, like I said, I hope you learn to love monarchs like I have learned to love them. They are getting ready to go. Went hiking this past weekend. We saw some monarchs out there, but they will gather up and leave pretty soon. We're looking to be on course for a kind of cold and wet winter. So they're going to head out very quickly because they cannot handle that kind of thing. So my challenge to you is go find a monarch butterfly if you can. Maybe they crisscross in spring migration or fall migration past your neck of the woods. Or maybe you live somewhere like me where they over summer where you are. Or maybe you live in Mexico and they're right where you are in Mexico or California. So you might get a chance to see them at different times of the year. But go out there and go see them. Really amazing. And if you think about it, go plant a couple of milkweeds. In a location you can let it spread out a little bit. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Appreciate you watching, listening. I hope this was entertaining to you, that you learned a little bit more about something that we maybe forget about because we see them so often, to know how special they really are. Remember, you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Love to hear from you. Know what kind of experience you have with monarch butterflies.